Cool. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining our Twitter Spaces today. This is a special one. I think this is the first true collaborative panel that we've done on Spaces. We've had groups before. Usually they're all the same team. So this one's kind of special. It is an event at the end of a 7-week program we've been calling the pilot program. We run this program to bring external teams a bit closer to our own team and help build support for them and just collaborate with them more closely as they bring different ideas to life on Tableland. Just for context, the program's split into 2 tracks. One is we call the developer track, and the other one is called the partner track. And so we had the 2 teams from the partner track. These are teams that work a bit more privately and are leveraging Tableland and deep product ideas and integrations. And you can hear my previous interviews with those 2 teams, Dap House and Surreal, on our YouTube channel. And today I'm talking to our developer track, and developer track is really for early ideas, small teams, privateer developers that are figuring out kind of how they can even build with Tableland, and is it going to solve the problems that they're imagining. Knowing that market fit is one of the most important metrics for early ideas, these projects are all building out pretty much in the open. And so a lot of people here might actually be familiar with these teams, as in week 2 of the program, so about 5 weeks ago, they all published sort of proposals for the ideas of what they would build. We held a snapshot vote where our community NFT holders, rigs owners, were able to vote on their kind of most exciting ones from that phase of the project. So now we're at 7 weeks. We're wrapping up. All the teams are joining us again now to talk about what they were able to complete over that time. A little bit more about the program, because I think it's pretty fun, and I just want to throw a little advertisement out there for our next run of the program. It's a really simple, lightweight program. We join sort of on Discord. We join the teams every week for a pretty simple stand up, just having everybody share their vibe and keep things moving forward, trying to make sure that we're collaborating and able to give them any support that they need. We work mostly asynchronously on Discord and through shared pages on Notions. There are very few expectations from us as a team, except for try to build something and let's see what we can do. And so if you're a developer working on an idea on Tableland, get in touch with us. We'll be opening up the second round of pilot program applications in the next couple weeks, but you can ping us early and we can get your name in there. Yeah, so these teams have all finished their final iteration. They submitted their final sort of project briefs, which are really cool because they include small videos that you can watch that just walk through what they built, what they did, and what their product is. And I found the videos really, really fun to watch, actually, and just 100% success rate, I think, in those videos, and just sharing some interesting stuff that was built. We'll tweet out the link to all of those here in a minute. But if you look at our old tweets, you can see them. They're actually in a now live snapshot vote where people are voting on their favorite final projects. There's a table with all 5 outcomes. You can click on those links, read about them, and see the videos that I mentioned. So that might be a mouthful, I guess, just to kick this off, but I wanted to give you all context of what the heck pilot program is and why these teams have joined us. If you have questions along the way here, feel free to @, us on Twitter, or if you're in our Discord, just mention any questions there. And I think Brian will help pick those up and make sure that I make space to ask them, which is important. Next piece here is I'm joined with 2 other members of the team, Brian and Dan here, who were really helping spearhead the developer track and working with these teams, both in those weekly calls and just checking in with everybody and making sure people were solid, and Dan just doing lots of the technical help and keeping people wired up and fixing our own product as we went to make sure that things could be built quickly and outcomes were good. So anyway, thanks for those guys joining, and I think they'll probably jump in some of the discussion, and yeah, hopefully we can go down some cool tracks today. So I thought maybe to start today's discussion, it would be best just to do a quick kind of round the room set of introductions from each of you. And I thought maybe just answer 4 quick questions for everybody that's listening. What's your name or preferred handle? What are you doing when you're not building with Tableland? what's the name of the project or concept you built during the pilot program, and then maybe just a 1 or 2 minute little pitch of what it is for people that didn't have a chance to watch the video yet. And I'll just start maybe with Daniel. And
sounds good. Hey everybody, my name is Daniel, or I go by Data Dan is my handle. When I'm not building on Tableland, I'm a software engineer. I've been working as a professional engineer for the last 12, 13 years, I think. And I'm currently bootstrapping a startup with some friends. And my project is an NFT project that I've called Extension Runners, which is an NFT project that allows the holders of the tokens to customize them by enabling and disabling individual traits. And the project is built on top of an existing project called Chain Runners. It's been a really awesome project that's been out for almost a year now, I think, that I've been a community member for a long time. And what my project allows chain runner holders to do is that they can claim tokens that match their original runners. The tokens are sold bound to their original runners, so they can trade or sell them, but they can use them to customize what the runners look like, and maybe remove the background if they want to make that look nicer when they use it as their Twitter Blue PFP, or remove a cigarette or earrings that their runner's wearing that they don't like, or something like that. And of course, using Tableland for all that mutability and maybe building that awesome functionality. So
yeah, we'll get into all that. Cool. How about Michael?
Hi, I'm Michael Boyle. When I'm not building Tableland stuff, I'm working on a project called Rebel, which is a platform for Web3 communities and creators. For the pilot program, I worked on a project called Non-Fungible Comments. And the idea was to build a sort of open discussion system for NFT projects. I thought it would be really cool to make it possible for project owners to allow holders and to comment on NFT tokens on each item in a collection, and to make that interoperable such that a platform like Rebel could host discussions around NFTs, or they could be embedded in marketplaces like OpenSea, or integrated in wallets like Rainbow, or wherever people are interacting with NFTs. I think it's pretty cool. I think Tableland is amazing. And it's been a great experience in the pilot program. Was that all the questions? I feel like
no, you did them. And that was it. And the plug at the end was awesome too. I'll send you a check later. No, that's really nice. Thank you. So yeah, I mean, next up, going by Twitter handle here, how about Zettel?
Sure. So our individual data are very fragmented in different applications, mostly in the web world. We often have our contents, favorites, likes, and bookmarks, etc. in Twitter or Notion or Discord, YouTube, to name a few. And these data are sold, and they are very hard to be consumed by any other apps. Or if you want to build a new app, it's hard to build on top of these existing data. And so that's why we made the terminal a place to automatically bring this app data together and provide them as a on-chain data source for users.
Awesome. Yeah, loud and clear that time. So, okay, next up, how about MetaBadge?
Hey, thanks, Andrew. So here working on MetaBadge. I think the first question was, what do I do when I'm not working on things related to Tableland? And the answer to that is, I've been a founder in Web 2 in the past, and now sort of full-time working in Web 3. And been really kind of intrigued by this whole space of soul-bound tokens, which kind of brings us to what MetaBadge is. The main goal of MetaBadge is to allow people to easily create non-transferable tokens, which have been more commonly called soul-bound tokens recently. And the main purpose of that is for representing credibility on chain, or representing reputation on chain, or being able to recognize somebody who's beta tested for you or been a key part of your community. So these badges can be used for that, and every badge can have specific metadata on a per recipient basis, which is where Tableland came in, and I'm sure we'll talk a lot more about that. So I'll pause there for now. But yeah.
Great. Okay, and last up is by handle here, speaker, ...
Me, I guess, faces. I work on a project called Dope Wars. Amongst other things, I guess I'd describe myself as a maker. Currently splitting my time between Web 2 and Web 3, trying to figure out how to make a living in Web 3 and sometimes succeeding, but mostly failing at the moment. And currently, worked on a project called Paper, Rock, Scissors for the Tableland pilot program, which is an on-chain game. First of many, hopefully, for our Dope Wars NFT project, as a proof of concept to understand how we might store non-ruggable, outcomes on chain. So, if you win a game or lose a game, we can store the outcome of that in Tableland from a contract that can't be edited anywhere else. And we can use the outcomes of that for contests and giveaways and things like that in the future. And it's really interesting to me to understand how we can start involving more activity on chain. So we're really looking at doing a lot of things on L2s like Optimism, where we store a ton of our information for our Dope Wars NFT characters we call hustlers, including the artwork, and you can swap gear and so on and so forth. So really looking to involve Tableland with a lot of stuff that we're doing going forward. And this is just the first of many things.
Awesome. I think you gave a nice segue to one of the questions that I had. So I'll just jump right to it. I think a lot of people are always interested in what are emerging products and projects choosing for their base layer, like what L1s and L2s are people building on. And I think just from looking at the final projects and what I'd heard in pilot program chatter, I think that the most used was Polygon, but maybe that was just because of development flows. I'm curious if anybody wants to share what network they are planning to build for or networks, and how they're thinking about network support and why they're choosing, Optimism over Polygon or Polygon over Ethereum main chain, or anybody have anything they can share about their network choices?
I can speak a little bit to why I'm pretty hyped on Optimism versus Polygon, maybe more specifically. I think Polygon is really exciting. They've got a killer business development team that have gotten like Reddit and Facebook and a litany of big partnerships. And so there's tons of momentum there. And I think it's kind of the default choice for a lot of people. But Optimism is exciting to me because they have a significant focus on community governance and ownership over the protocol and over the direction of the development of the platform. And so something that's really cool that they are doing is betting really heavily on this idea of retroactive public goods funding, where it's sort of like, I'm probably not like an authority on speaking on this, but in short, I think the idea is basically that instead of having it be a situation where you're creating like products and selling them into the traditional model of like, I build a thing and I sell it to people, they want to encourage a new model of you make stuff, and if it has impact on the world, positive impact on the world, retroactively, their community can vote to reward projects that are adding value and rewarding it with their native token. So that's a really interesting way of funding, I think, software and projects that are open source and sort of measured by impact versus sort of like traditional capitalist like methods. But I think like the governance structure of it, the community there is really interesting. I think that they are technically extremely savvy. And that's probably one of the bigger reasons that I'm optimistic about building on Optimism. So that's why we're kind of building there that's why we chose to deploy NFCs there, and why we're building a lot of Rebel stuff on Optimism versus some of the other L2s that are out there.
Anyone else have thoughts? I feel like there's this thing with composability of existing assets. So Daniel, I suppose that you kind of there was fewer options for you. Do you agree with that? Or like how are you thinking about network choice?
Yeah, exactly. I'm going to be using ETH mainnet because that's where the chain runners, both the Genesis and the XR collection exists. And since part of the experience is like token gated or controlled by the new tokens will be bound to the original tokens, they kind of have to live on mainnet. But because of, the awesome feature of Tableland where you can deploy tables on multiple networks and then join the data together, I'll still be uploading some of the Tableland data from other networks to save on the deployment cost and then like join that in the queries from mainnet. So deploying as little as possible to mainnet, but like still having the tokens live on mainnet.
Yeah. Any of the other three have network choices or favorites or?
Yeah, I can jump in there, I think, as well. And say, I'll beat the optimism drum again, I guess, and say that we had already chosen that for our assets, which are pretty complicated. Our hustlers and gear NFTs have a lot of data associated with them. And so it was just not possible and not cost effective to deploy to ETH mainnet for those things. They are really customizable. So for instance, if you're not familiar with the Dope Wars project, you can mint essentially a video game character and they have 9 pieces of gear, and you can freely swap those out as ERC1155 tokens. And so doing all that on mainnet would have cost, multiple thousands of dollars and just not be feasible for a game type ecosystem. And so since we had already invested in optimism and really love I think the ethos of the network and the nature of the EVM equivalents, just decided to continue that investment on the Optimism platform by working on chain games on Optimism. We're also, the project, not myself personally right now, but the project is, also working on Starknet gaming and things of that nature. But I really wanted to see if it were possible to do an on-chain game on Optimism, which I have not seen yet. So exploring new territory was also something interesting for me. And I know, I'm also involved in a lot of projects, CyberKong's being one of those that's, on Polygon, and they have a really interesting on-chain game there. So I think it's really neat to see other options explored. And I think we'll see more of that as people try and figure out what to do with these low-cost chains and what actually works, and if on-chain gaming is even interesting for end users, right? It's interesting to us as engineers and coders, I think, but can we make it interesting enough for people to want to continue playing with all of the complexity and the difficulty with the user interface, right? On-chain games, I don't know how many of the listeners out there understand kind of what it entails, but you essentially make a move and then you sign a transaction and then you make another move and then you sign a transaction, and that could be pretty fatiguing if you don't handle the user experience well. And so one of the problems I'm really interested in trying to solve, and some of the other folks from our project are as well, is figuring out how do you make that a really great user experience, and is it possible? So that's one of the reasons why we chose Optimism.
Yeah, happy to speak to this a little bit. I think our use case here is a bit different in the sense that we want our users to be able to pick the chain that they end up deploying the badges to, and then we're just going to deploy the data to whatever chain they pick. So if they decide that their use case is best fit for ETH mainnet, then we'll also store the data on ETH mainnet. If they choose Optimism, then we'll follow them on Optimism. And so, yeah, I think we're a little bit less opinionated in that, but that's another benefit, I think, of using Tableland, and the fact that you guys have kind of already built out some good foundation on all these chains allows us to kind of just piggyback on that effort, and so allows us to build that flexibility for our users.
Cool, thanks. Yeah, some good thoughts there. Okay, so choosing the chain, seems like there's a lot of options right now, and we get to kind of pick and choose based on what our vision is for these things we're building. But I think it was just touched on another question and kind of area I'd be curious what you're all thinking about, or how you're all thinking about it, is on the usability side. I think I noticed in most of the projects kind of touch on this issue of signing, and like, what is the experience going to be if you're signing a lot of transactions, or like, how do you get around that? How were any of you thinking about that, and how are you thinking about that? Like, are you seeing solutions to usability and wallet signature fatigue, or are you thinking that people are just used to it right now and we're just going to, build into it for the time being?
I can jump in there again. So there are two ways that I'm actually thinking about it. One of the ways is not going to be related to the Tableland stuff, but if you if people are interested in a way to handle this, one of the members from our project, Terrence, is building out a thing called Cartridge, and it's a gaming wallet specifically for Starknet, where you essentially lend it access to your tokens and you give it a budget, and you can, interact with a specified contract and it will approve those transactions for you over time. And I think that's a really wonderful way to handle the UX problem. That idea kind of was spun out of our Dope Wars project. I am personally going to take another approach for the UX with the paper, rock, scissors game, where I'm going to try and make the web app as engaging as possible. And we have like a live chat and you can talk to the other person and maybe, kind of talk smack to them while you're choosing your transaction. It's going to have animation while you're actually, submitting your move. So we're using a commit reveal pattern, which means they're roughly 4 or 5 transactions that you have to take to just play one round of a paper, rock, scissors game. So both players submit their transactions. So I pick paper and you pick rock, and then there's going to be like an animation, hopefully, and some sound, some music. There's going to be a live chat going. And then you have to reveal the transaction with the other player at the time that the game is done. And then there's a payout after that. And so I think distraction is my method with animations and sound and chat and things like that, to try and take your mind off of the fact that you are signing these things. And I think also a strategy of choosing optimism where, you're not looking at this and saying, oh shit, I just spent, whatever it is amount of ETH on mainnet to play this game. I think you have to have a low cost transaction to make that feasible as well. And I think the draw will be being able to get back more tokens than you actually put in, hopefully much more, for paying the gas fee. And so I will see how well that works, but it'll be interesting to see how it's received.
Yeah, the opportunity cost. Any other thoughts?
I think something you're going to wind up seeing happen more. So I don't know if anybody uses Farcaster, but what they do is they basically set up a wallet within, you download the Farcaster app and you set up your account, and they set up a wallet specific to the Farcaster app for your account. And then you link your existing wallet to the wallet that they create for you. And then everything that you do within the Farcaster app is signed automatically and transparently with the wallet that they create for you. And so I think something you're going to wind up seeing is like that method or variations of it, where either wallets are going to sort of redesign themselves so that as you start to see more social interactions and standard social interactions, they will either just build into the UX and into the user experience, into the user expectations, that certain things you won't have to just sign for, it'll just work. I mean, like the comments thing is kind of a good example of this. Like, let's just pretend that for a moment, like the comments project became a sort of standard thing that was implemented widely. It would probably become sort of part of the expectation of interacting with these applications, that you don't have to sign every time you're going to like leave a comment on something. And so I think that there will be a combination of apps building sort of native wallets into your accounts, and you link like your main wallet to that, and then they just sign on your behalf transparently, or they start to just redesign and kind of get up at like use either account abstraction or just start to like sign certain things and certain interactions transparently for the user. Because I think that it is an unnecessary speed bump and something that regular people aren't going to want to deal with. Like, I just feel like there are so many of these sort of things that are going to prevent like what people talk about, onboarding the next 1 million or 10 million people into crypto. And this type of like wallet stuff is way above most people's threshold of what they want to deal with to interact with the web. Like, I don't think that you're going to see mass adoption of crypto until these experiences are on par with what we like are doing in Web 2. So I think that a lot of that stuff is going to wind up, there's a lot of pressure, I would say, like market pressure and kind of a forcing function to reduce that friction. So one way or another, I think over time and over the next couple of years, probably you'll start to see a lot of that just get abstracted away. Like, for the most part, I think that like it won't be long before interacting with at least like social apps, like when you're moving money around and moving assets around, there should be like levels of verification, and sort of like those speed bumps are valuable. But as more and more social use cases start to make their way into our crypto experiences, I think that they'll more or less resemble using the old web, where you just do this stuff and you're not having to sign every transaction to make changes.
Yeah, fully. Farah, how about you? I know that in your project, there's a lot of transactions, both on kind of both ends of like consuming data, maybe not as many signatures needed, but then on the output to Web3 and into dApps, are there many signatures in that flow? And how are you thinking about dealing with it?
Well, so we provide the output as a API. So actually that doesn't really get to interact with the developer. It's handled from the developer side. So they will sign once and then handle the rest from there. And for our main app, like the terminal and the interface, that's just one time. Yeah.
Yeah. So that actually is almost aligned with what Michael is saying too, about having just a service that signs for you in a way. Cool. I want to actually pause. I have a bunch more questions, but I want to actually let the other two guys on my team introduce themselves. And I thought maybe to share who you are and what you were doing during pilot program. And then, if you have any kind of interesting reflections on the program, things that you thought were interesting that came out of these teams, or how the collaboration went, I'd love to hear those from you. So maybe start with Brian, if you are ready. Oh, maybe he's not ready. He's getting some headphones on. How about Dan? How about you?
Yeah, sure. So Dan Buchholz, I help out with developer relations, developer experience at Tableland. And yeah, I mean, overall, it's just like a great experience working with everyone. I think like my main role was just to help coordinate some of the questions and responses around technical implementation and whatnot. So I think like a great learning was just how collaborative and how helpful everyone in the group was, where it's not like everyone was just off on their own, developing their own project in that like little silo. It was pretty relational, which obviously Tableland is a fan of, but it was a relational model in terms of like how people were helping out each other, answering questions and things like that. So it was really cool just to see that unfold. And then obviously the end result here was like some awesome projects. So it's just been like a great experience overall, and great getting to know everyone as well.
Yeah, and for my role, I'm kind of just behind the scenes. So I'm, helping make sure the trains are on the tracks, trying to make sure everyone's aware of when the meetings are, and kind of just soaking up the environment and trying to contribute to the culture and community of Tableland. And so it was just such a great delight to see these incredible developers come through and get to see them kind of their projects evolve over the course of the 7 weeks, and tuning in each week to just kind of where everyone's at as a human and what's going on in each of our lives as we're trying to build this new web together.
Awesome. Actually, Dan, I do have a question for you, because I think we talk we sidebar a lot about friction. I'm curious, was there an area of friction you saw emerge from many teams or most teams, or like, I'm just curious because maybe there's an area we can talk about there, but like, yeah, any trends you saw in friction using Tableland or other? Yeah,
I mean, I think generally there's like Tableland, it's great because it's like this multi-chain like deployable. You can have composability across different chains where you can save a lot of cost by just, instead of let's say saving some state variable that's mapping, tracking, let's say a game state or something like that, where you're actually, writing to storage consistently in a contract. You can actually save that data in Tableland, which is great. I think maybe one friction point, there's probably a couple. Like one, our docs are always getting revamped, so that's a work in progress there. I think like another friction point was maybe just getting reading data, getting it back on chain. I think that was like a request that came up through the pilot program, and something that I know internally, like we're doing a lot of research on that. So it was really valuable just hearing from developers, hearing from the community, like what they're looking for. And then like taking those friction points and actually like, okay, now we're internally knowing like what people want, and let's make sure we do the due diligence and research and everything behind that to see how we can potentially make it happen.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So I wanted to actually talk to the teams about composable data now. It's like something that we talk about a lot in the vision of Tableland and like why this stuff's important. I'm really curious how you all are thinking about it. But actually, Dan just gave me a thought that I'm really curious what your responses are, which is how much did you know SQL before this? And like, what are your thoughts on SQL? I'm like the biggest SQL fan out there. And so like, it's natural for me to just assume everybody will like it and want to use it. I'm curious, did anybody never use it before and have to pick it up? Was it just like familiar like HTML to you, but so you kind of knew how to navigate? Any opinions about SQL that emerged from using Tableland? And for those listening that don't know what SQL is, it's the query language. It's sort of like the lingua franca of using data in databases. And so one of the features of Tableland is that we use really normal SQL that you find in most other databases. And so for us, that's a real benefit. But I'm really curious here if it's not a benefit to everybody.
I love SQL. I just want to say that
Yes.
like one of the main draws to Tableland was being able to use SQL in a blockchain environment. Because I mean, I guess before, I mean, like it just like the first time like the idea of Tableland was introduced to me, it blew my mind because I was just so used to using like structs and like iterating with for loops through data to try and do aggregate operations. And just, I mean, it's like the Solidity doesn't in its current state lend itself well to managing structured data. And so it didn't ever occur to me that like you could use SQL. And so like in the context of writing Solidity code, like it was sort of like a glass of cold water in hell kind of proposition. But just outside of it, I mean, SQL's been around for so long that like, I mean, if you have been writing web software for your whole career, I mean, it's like SQL is where it's always sort of been. And so it was very natural to jump into it. It allowed me to like just get right to work and build something interesting. And I think it's such a great language to interact with data. So, I mean, I've had a lot of experience with it and was elated that Tableland was built with it. So that's my feedback on the SQL situation.
Yeah, I
Any
totally
others?
agree. Like I've had a lot of experience with SQL, like in multiple various forms, like MySQL, Postgres, other types of distributed SQL databases, and it's very natural. Like I think as you said, it's the lingua franca like for querying data, so it's really convenient and it's super cool. All the capabilities that we get from enabling that via on-chain data, so it's really neat.
Any differing opinions?
No, I was just gonna plus one everyone else. So
Awesome. So we're barking up the wrong tree or the right tree. So that's good. Cool. So let's jump into composable data, because that's another area that in Tableland we talk a lot about. And building Tableland, it was a lot around this idea, and it kind of touches on some of the answer that you all had around SQL, which is data stored in smart contracts isn't always the most composable, because it sometimes it lacks the structure, it lacks the query tool that you can pull data from one smart contract that you didn't write and use it in another smart contract that you want to write, or across applications and dApps. And so, yeah, SQL and the idea of this permissionless database got us really excited because it could potentially make data more composable. And with composable data, it's like open data and open networks of data, those composable building blocks like SQL and the structured tables, and then the permissionless access control and ownership of that data. They all get us like super jazzed. But so what I'm curious from all of you is, how are you thinking about data and composable data, or user-owned data in your application? Were these features that were guiding the ideas that you were creating, or are they secondary and just something that you needed to get to what you're building? Does that make sense? So like maybe you're just building a Web3 and data isn't the big thought that you had at all, and you just need it to work, and that's fair. Or is this whole idea of composable data interesting to you because now you have a project that you're building, it makes data available, and then suddenly other people can build totally new and unexpected things on it. I think like Zettel obviously has some really cool contributions to that. MetaBat, I mean, all of you have really cool potentials to like getting data into Web3 that then becomes composable. But I'm curious, any thoughts? Is composable a guiding, principle or feature of what you're doing, or just a tag along?
I think composability is a huge element of Web3 data. And one of the major unlocks of what's going to make it possible for super interesting projects to happen that just couldn't have happened before. I mean, I think for what I built, the commenting system has composability, elements of composability to it, which is exciting and interesting to me. But I think the next thing I'm going to build with Tableland is going to involve a locations database. You can kind of like a Foursquare type thing. And so I think that that's really exciting just from the perspective of, like if you think about old school Foursquare or any big Web2 data like based thing, and you are restricted to what their APIs make available, and you have to interact with what their developers build and make accessible and what their business model permits and all of that stuff. And just the sort of progression of most of those companies more and more locking down access to their data and to those APIs, it really inhibited a lot of like Twitter is a great example of this, where it started as a very open thing, and there was this really rich landscape of initial Twitter clients in the early days, but as they started to close down their API and access to it and implement all these limits, it really killed off a lot of that developer ecosystem and inhibited a lot of the creativity that could have occurred there. So data composability and interoperability in the context of Web3, I think, is just one of the most exciting elements of it. And when I start to think about what people will be able to do with like an open database of geographical locations of businesses, and like how all the different ways you could build on top of that, it gets me super excited. And I think that extends to just about anything, comments, game state. I mean, when you start to think about like composability around game state, like there's just a whole, it opens up a design space that's really kind of mind-boggling. So, and like badges and credentials and all of this stuff, I mean, it's mega exciting. And I just want to reiterate that, like, I don't think that the like Tableland specifically enables potential that probably wouldn't exist otherwise, and without like in a traditional smart contract paradigm. Like I really think that it's a major unlock, making traditional like relational databases available on chain. Certainly through write, but if you guys figure out how to do reads as well, like that's, I mean, it's wild to make that available, and a gigantic unlock when it comes to composability. And I think composability is at the heart of what is going to make one of the keystones of what's going to make innovation in Web3 possible. So I think it's a huge deal.
Yeah. One comment to that, I think we have line of sight to reads on chain for sure. So that'll be amazing. Any other thoughts on composability from teams?
Hey, I'm happy to share some thoughts here. I think to go to your question, Andrew,
I can speak on that. So I think a bit of
primary motivation or like a nice to have. Yeah, I think for us it was very much in the camp of a primary motivation. When we thought about on-chain credibility, on-chain reputation, I don't think that they're very valuable unless you can unlock things as a result of them, or like whether that's unlocking a job or eventually a under collateralized loan, or a number of things. The reason you want to have these badges is so that you can kind of build your like on-chain history and on-chain reputation, but that is hopefully a utility to some future outcome. And so composability is not a nice to have. I think it is inherent to everything that we're doing. So
Thanks. Yeah. Any other thoughts?
Just a big +1 to what both Boyle and Roll said. I agree. Tableland is amazing in what it enables from a composability perspective, and I think it's the foundational piece that we need for cool innovation to happen in Web3. So
I'll jump in and mention something that I didn't hear anyone else talk about, which is a thing that really interests me, is being able to do joins between all these tables, right? So if you're familiar with SQL, I say SQL, not SQL, so I guess I'm a weirdo here. If you can do joins between those different tables, you can get really interesting things happening. And so I think as more data becomes available on the Tableland tables, you'll be able to start coming up with different use cases that we might not have imagined right now. And so it'll be interesting to see if there's any sort of like registry of Tableland tables published that we can kind of take a look at and explore all of that data. I think that could be a really cool thing to see from the Tableland side of things as the ecosystem evolves, maybe like by chain or something and by project. That could be really cool, a directory of some sort. For us in particular at Dope Wars, like the idea was we're going to develop a series of games and store the outcomes in Tableland in separate tables, right? So this paper, rock, scissors thing is the first one. It's super simple. And you can say, okay, hey, I wanted this. And, I have so many wins and so many losses. But, other community members are developing, there's like a fighting game that's built in Unity that I'm going to try and poke those guys to store the outcome of the rounds also in Tableland. So we can start building this really rich ecosystem of how experienced your character is across all these different gaming experiences. And I think that's a draw of, this quote unquote metaverse, that idea that people are really interested in. And so if the idea is that you can play multiple games with an NFT as your character, how do you track the performance of that character across all these different games? I think something like Tableland could really weave that together and be really interesting to see. And so, really interested in that composability part of it.
Yeah. Funny thing about the SQL versus SQL. I think I flip back and forth. I'm not sure if I have a preferred way I say that, but we went to ETH Denver in February to like unveil this idea. And if you are familiar with our website, there's a specific font on our website, and we went with a banner behind our booth, and it said something about SQL. And a few people came up to our booth, and the Q looks just slightly like an O. So they came up with this misunderstanding that we were only on Solana, and we were at this ETH Denver event. And we were like, no, it's SQL, it's SQL, it's a query language, it's awesome. Anyway, funny thing, SQL. I love it. Not everybody knows it. Sounds like we have some fans in the room, though. Probably, I'd have to imagine most people building on Tableland are going to have to be fans, or they're going to leave. That point about the joins, I fully agree. I'm like so excited about what happens when you can compose data across projects. And what's really cool is being able to like pull data out that has access control defined by the project that's writing to it. And you can't modify that, but you can extend it exactly like the chain runners example, where it's totally new concept built on it without having to modify the original at all. And like then play on what is the original, which is like letting people continue selling and trading those and whatever, and feed that into your own project. I'm so excited by that. And like, it's really interesting because like the smart contract side of compute probably also isn't necessarily the best place to be doing data compute, and SQL is really powerful at data compute. And when you like go beyond the join, you can Turing complete style, like do pretty much anything there. It's just a matter of what the network allows you to do. So yeah, super cool. I'm curious. I'm curious about some questions to each of the teams. I was thinking maybe Dan also, if you had any questions for teams, feel free to jump in, and if you have any like general questions. Yeah.
I had one, well, really just on the last topic, just thinking through some of the different ideas and projects that everyone has built, like Zettel around composability. Curious if you have any thoughts there, because like from my understanding, that's sort of like your whole mission is really enabling this Web 2 to Web 3 bridge for composability in a sense. So any thoughts on composability in general?
That's composability is our whole mission. But one question we do realize as we are preparing data for to be consumed is that we realize very few apps actually build on these data that from other sources. So we're interested in exploring more spaces, how to consume these data even within our own app as a extension. So I think that with more exploration into that space, that would help us understand how to prepare the data even better to be consumed in by other developers. I think that's we've heard all the stories of utilizing assets across different metaverse, across different applications, but few has been realized in reality.
Yeah, that's super interesting. So kind of what kind of data standards or formats can emerge that lots of other people can build on? How are you thinking about that? How are you thinking about cleaning and putting into a format that lots of other projects will consume? Do you just have like an initial opinion on what that data should look like, or are you riding on existing standards from projects in Web 2 or elsewhere for what is the shape of data that makes it clean?
I think at the moment we're just building on the standards, right? Like we assume to be the standard ways. But as we are actually thinking further to actually writing down our first D app extension to consume data from our own app, then we realize, okay, there's a lot more questions we have not considered about different fields here and there. So I think we have to ground our thoughts into something more tangible, maybe a couple of different apps to start with, and then helping us then abstract what is actually needed. I don't have a firm answer to that question at the moment because we're still working on that part. But I think it's something that is worth thinking about.
Yeah, really cool. So actually, it's kind of a parallel thought here I had for the non-fungible comments, which is I don't know if you caught it, but in week 2, when the proposals first went out, there were some people in our general channel that were kind of giving some pushback on whether comments would work on NFTs, and I think their main concern was that they would just always turn gross negative, or I think that was the point, if I remember correctly. And I'm curious how you're thinking about that. Like, where do you think like social tooling and communication tooling and networks go in a permissionless system and protocol? How do we navigate that?
Well, something that is really cool about Tableland is how you can kind of program access control. And it's something that I was considering for the future of like the commenting thing is the ability to I think there are a few different ways that you could approach this. Like one way is like through token gating. So with the access control stuff, you could basically build into the policy about who can like write into the database. You could say you could only write into this if you're a token holder, right? So for instance, like you're probably less likely to trash or be uber negative if you are a token. If I'm a rig owner, it's unlikely that I'm going to be in there spamming or maybe I shouldn't say that. Fudding the project or whatever, but you're perhaps less likely to have more like toxic comments than just the wide sort of internet. But something else I was also kind of like considering is that like you could build like I was thinking that what would be kind of cool is to build like certain hooks into say you have like a generic commenting contract that you could implement on a collection, or just more broadly into like into a community or a project or whatever. Like I thought it would be cool that like you could have a plugin, for instance, where you got to pay like $1 or $2 to leave a comment, such that like you'd be like financially disincentivized to say something that is likely to get moderated out or removed. Or if you wanted to yeah. So anyway, I mean, I think like what's interesting about Web3 and what's interesting about Tableland is that it opens up the door to have some more sophisticated filters and patterns for this kind of thing. I mean, I think that like this is like an Ev Williams thing, I think, when it comes to like Twitter and social networking, is just that like these tools really just amplify human behavior, and like people are going to be people. And you're always going to kind of like run into this stuff. So those types, like the idea that like there's sort of like financial incentives that can be introduced into this stuff, that you can be more programmatic and more selective about who can access and write and participate based on token ownership. And as you start to get things like meta badge integrated into the mix, where people start to like, you can say only people who have like a certain level of reputation can comment on this collection. Like that's where it starts to become really interesting to me. And I think that's where you start to see like more healthy or like higher signal right to noise like ratios in this stuff, is when you start to lean into like those, you got composability and you've got like that sort of gating for some of those features. So that's how I think like it evolved. I think comments in the old school system have always been kind of a toxic place. Like people always joke about that, like on like old school blogs and comment section on YouTube and stuff like that. There's no way to really qualify somebody, or to like Reddit kind of does it like an okay job with this, because you have upvoting and downvoting on comments, and they tend to surface like pretty good stuff towards the top of a discussion in any given thing. But I think that like when you start to lean into blockchain paradigms, you're going to see that taken to the next level. So I'm kind of excited about, broadly speaking, how social evolves in the Web3 context.
Yeah, it feels like there's just some natural, especially at like the collection level, natural opportunities for like also introducing community moderation. And if you just did it vote based, then you could delegate your vote, and suddenly you have mods that emerge. And I also think back to earn.com. It was like the pay ETH to get to email somebody from Balaji, I think it was. So that could be an interesting model to look at. And I don't know if you ever thought, I think in Tableland there's the hidden feature of pay to insert.
Oh, I didn't see that. No, that's what I mean, but that's kind of gets in line with like what I'm thinking there. You know, it's sort of like, if, you know, like not only would that reduce spam, where like somebody could just post their download, like here's our collections minting now, like a million comments onto every collection. If it cost $1 or a couple dollars to post into all of those things, like, you know, it would prevent like just sort of mass commenting and spamming of these collections. But to your point about like I think that like it's interesting to me, the idea that if you could allocate, say like as a creator, a collection owner, you could allocate a percentage of your royalties that automatically go into like a moderator fund. And then you've got a situation where like there's built into like all of these collections, there's like a sort of like incentive to keep commenting healthy or whatever. And like all of these mechanisms where like you've got voting and sort of checks and balances and all of this stuff, where like you have an incentive to remove bad comments because there's like an automatic allocation out of royalty payments, or however it kind of gets figured out. I mean, all that stuff is now possible, and it wasn't really possible before in a meaningful way. And so I think people are going to figure that stuff out. I mean, we'd love to solve some of those problems or work through some of those challenges at Rebel, but I think broadly speaking, it's going to be something that people figure out and implement. And I think you're going to wind up seeing I hope that we see a much healthier discourse in Web3 social as a result of it. And I think people will like actually have like sort of like rewarding careers doing stuff like moderating comments and keeping discussions like healthy and civil and all of that. I think you'll start to see like a lot of people actually employed and making a living doing things like community leadership and management. But yeah, like when I sit there and noodle on like how you can program access, like look up with the get policy stuff, and that there's a payable get policy, I think that's crazy. Yeah, it's like that just opens up so many possibilities, and I'm super excited to explore the edges of all of that.
Cool. Data done. I always say that part wrong. I try my best, but you're building a use case that I think we started seeing it could be possible and really cool really early at Tableland. We didn't know exactly what we would build there, what people would build there, but like we love it, and we love, and I already mentioned on this call that idea of extending existing collections and doing things like like fragmenting out the features and things like that. I think it's super cool, and I'm wondering what led you to think of that idea. Like, was that on your mind since you've been in chain runners, that you wanted to get rid of the cigarette and you were looking for the way to do it, or is it some bigger picture idea? Or yeah, how did you come up with that?
I think it's a mix of things, but it's definitely been like on my mind since I joined the community like a long time ago, that there's a lot of people that have like this one thing. Maybe I just always wanted to remove the background because it looks cleaner if I use it as like Twitter Blue PFP or something. But since it's like on-chain immutable, you can't do that. And there are some traits that are like, if you're going to identify with this like character that or a alternate like personality they have online, I feel like some sort of like customizability is really important. So I just kind of always knew I wanted to build it, and when I saw Tableland and like how that could help me build that in such an easy and convenient way, it was just a perfect match. So,
how generic could you make the solution? Like, how many other collections could you deploy fairly quickly to, or did it take a lot of like reverse engineering the artwork?
I think you could do really quickly. I'm going to open source everything because there is another Tableland community member that wanted to try to build this for another collection. So I think that should be fairly, if the art and the layering is done in a fairly simple way, I think that should be totally doable pretty quickly. There's not a lot that's chain runner specific in the code at all, except for the UI part that looks and feels chain runnery, but that can be replaced.
I wonder, because I love the example of like the Twitter PFP, like where you want this verifiable asset you own, and then with your flow, it's almost verifiable that you also own the original asset. I wonder if there's a way to have it sort of like signaled by the collection owner or something like this, that this is a verified derivative, or are people working on that idea?
I don't know, but I mean, I think we'll see a lot of collections. I mean, I think the metadata standard will evolve over time so that you can have like, it's not just image URL and that's it, but you can have like a customized image URL for avatars. And then that's what's being displayed on Twitter. And when that happens, I think collections will kind of build this in natively, so that we don't have to build this kind of extensions on top of it. So yeah, that's kind of my guess.
On a scale of 0 to 10 as like an NFT builder, I'm curious of people's opinion on this too. How bad are the metadata standards right now? So 10 being they're great and 0 being they're awful.
That's a good question. I think they were great, but they feel a bit outdated, and like they don't really cover a lot of the use cases that we see. So definitely feels like we could use an extension for sure.
Yeah, they seem to go really quickly. They fragmented a little bit. They pulled back together, or kind of like fuzzed over the fragmentation, and now they're a little bit stuck for sure. I feel like we could play a big role in pushing forward lots of new standards there.
Yeah, I think so too. And it'll be interesting to see if like new standards for table schemas for NFT collections on Tableland evolve too, so that there's like, make composability even easier if you kind of know what the schema will look like.
Totally. Yeah, so that actually brings me to a question for paper, rock, scissors. Basically, like, I actually really love how you have these bigger picture ideas for where Dope Wars is going and building out this kind of world for owners and players. But I also really love how you've been able to boil down kind of like a big picture direction to like, actually with this example, like a game of paper, rock, scissors. And so a couple questions. One, how much of the game concept of paper, rock, scissors was driven by the name of the paper token? Or did you already have that linkage in mind? Because it's just like perfect branding. But also then I thought, it hasn't been much space yet. Could you share a bit of your bigger vision for Dope Wars generally and kind of how this fits in and where you're going?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for asking. I think it was just kind of serendipitous that we have a token called paper, and I actually have a friend who makes streetwear of all things, and I have a lot of friends that make streetwear actually, but one of them in particular, mentioned to me back, I think beginning of last year when we were talking about, I had not gotten into Web3 and I was just thinking about NFTs and things like that. And he's like, yo, we should do this game called Rock, Paper, Scissors, because he had made a t-shirt that was really popular with like cartoon Mickey Mouse hands on it with the different paper, rock, scissors things. And so it's been an idea that, he kind of seeded me with that back then. And I just saw the opportunity to make a very simple game of skill, right? So folding that into kind of the overall vision of Dope Wars, we're really trying to figure out how to make a gaming protocol that uses our tokens as a gaming token. And if anyone's familiar with all of the drama going on with Coinbase and the SEC right now, there's a lot of scrutiny as to what makes a gaming token and what you can actually use these tokens for. And so, I'm kind of navigating all of this at the same time. If you're familiar with gaming laws, you cannot take money or things that are kind of like money, like tokens, if it's a game of chance, right? So I couldn't make like a dice game and, pay out tokens for that. That would be considered gambling most places and probably land me in some trouble, which I'm trying to avoid. But in a lot of places, games of skill, where there's an actual strategy, are acceptable. And games of skill where you're actually using a gaming token where it's not an investment, right? We're looking to avoid, raising some eyebrows with the Howey test and all of those things. We're trying to really establish paper as a gaming token. So where you can use paper on our online marketplace to buy characters and equipment. That's another project that I'm working on, where you can go to our site, dopewars.gg, and actually transact in the token to buy in-game assets. The overall vision is that we're building this gaming protocol based on our NFTs that are interchangeable and based on this gaming token where, the DAO, we're also a DAO. We have too much stuff going on, but where the DAO can say, hey, creator, we would like you to make a game and we will compensate you for making that game and making it available to our community. But here are the rules, right? You must use our gaming token, you must use our NFT assets, and you must contribute some of the revenue back to the DAO, right? And with paper, rock, scissors, I'm really trying to boil it down to its most simplistic implementation so that people can look at this and say, okay, cool, here's a framework for making games for Dope Wars. I'd like to make something a little bit more complex, but I can use these building blocks of how you accept the token and plugging it into the website and storing the outcome in a Tableland table. And that starts to build up the gaming ecosystem and the possibilities that you can, explore if you have one of our hustler characters, right? So maybe, like I said, there's a couple of other games being worked on. One is a classic reinterpretation of the Dope Wars game, our NFT namesake, where you buy and sell and transact virtual drugs on the blockchain, and you use the paper token. Another one is kind of like a GTA style game that's being worked on. That's an old pixel game. But the vision is that other people will be attracted to this, and hopefully game creators, and say, cool, these assets already exist, and I don't have to build everything from scratch. And I think that composability story is really interesting in the context of Web3, because really that's what it's all about, right? That's why we're putting all this stuff on chain. That's why there's this whole movement with, CC0 licensing, where you can take these NFTs or these assets and use them in whatever context you feel like you should, in this open nature of the web, kind of what Mike was talking to with the old school implementation of Twitter. The open nature of it, I think, is appealing to a lot of us who lived through that first Web 2 wave, right? I am probably older than most on this call and in the Web3 space. And I vividly remember when, Twitter first came out, I was sending tweets via text message. And then I had written 2 or 3 Twitter clients, right, in Ruby, just because I could, right? And I wrote a whole bunch of bots that spun up hundreds of, accounts and all of those things. And so to me, Web3 and the open nature of it and the composability of it really is a chance to redo some of the Web 2 stuff that I think my generation, pardon my swearing, we fucked up, right? Where it really went to this corporate control and siloed data and all of those things. I think some of us are trying to undo a little bit of that, and so I think Tableland and things like that are pieces of that puzzle, hopefully, to make that data accessible to everybody.
Yeah, that's awesome. Speaking of old, I used to like remember very fondly Yahoo Pipes as one of the coolest experiments on the web. And then I used to wonder like what happened to the Yahoo Pipes days. And then I realized it's just like Web3 is that on like times a million, which is so cool if we make it composable. So MetaBadge is sitting at the intersection of lots of really cool ideas in Web3. Like I think obviously soulbound tokens have become, a very common, or not a very well-known idea, or more well-known idea in just even the last 6 months. And the ideas of certification, reputation, merit, credibility, education, those are like topics that Web3 has been circling in on, and like combining them is really seeming to be an exciting area. And so I'm curious from the MetaBadge team, like what were some of the use cases specifically that got you most excited to explore the direction of building a tool and platform that made this easier? Are there like, I actually have a follow-up question to that too, which is like, are there, based on kind of what got you excited, are there also like users or markets outside of Web3 that you think are likely early adopters of this, and how do we get them to like come to Web3 to use a system? Because tokens that track certification and reputation seem broadly usable on the web.
Yeah, no, it's a really good set of questions. So to your first one around the use cases that got us interested, I think that there's a couple buckets of use cases. One of them is recognizing, like you said, certification. So interesting things here could be things like, let's say somebody makes a online quiz that is related to Discord security, and you want to make sure that anyone that is a moderator in your community has first passed that online quiz. And so at the end of that quiz, you could give out a badge that signifies that, and then they could use that badge wherever they go. It's not restricted to one community or to one website. They can take that wherever they go and show that same reputation. So I think certification is one. I think contribution is another, and I think contribution is typically coupled with access. So for example, we've had a couple DAOs come to us and say, hey, we want to give a couple of our key contributors soulbound tokens, and then we want those soulbound tokens to kind of come back into different tools that we're using, like Discord, and then give them access to certain channels using the typical NFT to Discord, sort of channel mechanisms that we all know of. So that's two. So first one is certification, second one's contribution, and then the third one I think is governance. So currently the governance model that we've mostly seen is fungible tokens being, or transferable tokens being sent out that people can very quickly sell and monetize. I think there's been some interesting moves from folks like Optimism to actually give soulbound tokens for some cases and then transferable tokens for others. But I think like generally speaking, those are the three big use cases within Web3 that we've spoken to, and then that does naturally kind of extend to a couple of use cases that are outside of the pure Web3 ecosystem, which is stuff, kind of like continuing down the path of certification, I think, is where we've seen the most extended Web2 interest. So, finishing an online course and then being able to get an NFT. I think those use cases will take some time to mature and grow. And there's a lot of discussion within the soulbound space of like DIDs and verifiable credentials versus soulbound tokens. Our view on it is like they're actually both great. Like they're both great sets of technology. I think both should exist and will prosper in different use cases. And I do think that DIDs and VCs will probably meet the Web2 use cases first before like the hard move to NFTs, just because of all like the Web3 friction points that we've talked about earlier in this call around wallets and signatures and stuff like that. So I think typically we're pretty focused on the Web3 use cases for now, and then we'll entertain the Web2 use cases as they come.
Yeah, a couple of thoughts there. One, I feel like that the verification step, it's in my mind, it's like we really need to build some tooling on our end that allows, or we need some people in the ecosystem to help build some tooling that allow things like Discord gating by reading the results of SQL from Tableland, and then let projects configure what that looks like. So maybe it's something we should talk more about, and trying to find some teams even to bring into the next pilot program that want to build tooling like that. Right. I think could be really interesting. Or
Totally.
Yeah, because if we had just even a generic base level framework that then you could build on and extend, that could get you someplace really fast there too, potentially. So
exactly.
yeah,
Some sort of like, on-chain, like skill level of security, like training or like the, just, your awareness of various things, unlocking channels, and then extending that to like, how involved you've been in your contribution and stuff like that as well. So completely agree there.
Yeah. So, okay, that brings me back to Farah and Zettel. I actually really love a piece of a sort of like a high level thought of your system and the architecture in the fact that it sort of is hourglass shaped, where it sort of can bring in all these different sources of information from Web 2 and the sort of websites and services that we're using, and then comes through, gets, like you mentioned, cleaned or processed, and then it kind of can become all of Web3 out through your console and API. And I think that's an awesome way to think about starting to build knowledge bases and information tools, and like it kind of just gives you so much optionality for what can then be built on top of it. And I'm just like curious how you've been thinking about knowledge bases and sort of like where they're going in the future. Like what is your big overarching kind of thought around how we're going to organize knowledge individually or through services and systems? And what got you thinking about this to start this project in the first place?
So what interests us initially is we noticed that tools like Notions, for example, they are like almost serves as a like a hard disk for your information, which they actually archive since live in there forever. And we're interested in actually serve as a RAM or of your information, which since can come here and make a value of them and maybe just go away. So it's more like we are interested in how to process information and bring that tools to the information, then trying to bring information to the tools itself, the verse wise. And that's where it get us started as building these kind of a pipeline for data and routing them to different apps, or having them in bringing different tools in that terminal and bringing information together to the same place and melting them in this interface. And I think in the future there will be more, for example, DAO toolings, other productivity apps in the space that can use our data as a starting point.
Totally. Do you think so the data that comes in, so imagine you're connecting to a Twitter feed. On the other side, if I wanted to consume that from you from an endpoint, can you kind of think of it like a verified feed? Like, is there some trustability then when it goes through the narrow band to say like, yeah, for sure this data is coming from this source and it has these timestamps?
I think that's probably something we are not so heavily focused on. We are more interested in having users control of their own data, because we are letting users to choosing what they can import into Zettel from different sources. That's like attaching their data to their wallet address to be consumed by elsewhere. Maybe touch on the validation is user do have to give permission in some cases to drag the data Zettel. In that case, they do give permissions and validations of that's their own data.
Got it. Yeah, the reason I was actually asking was I started thinking in my head as we were hearing from MetaBadge, like if there was a way to actually use Zettel to pull in other real world feeds that might lead to soulbound tokens and certifications. So like performing some function that leads to maybe a verified Twitter account tweeting a specific thing about the work you did, or I was just thinking if there was a potential link up there.
Yeah, we completely agree. I think that those will be really valuable.
Yeah, I think there's a chance because in the terminal interface, in the front end, we do have different extensions. I think unlock could be one extension that get plugged into the system that just almost serve as the gate, and then can verify the NFT or whatever credentials you may have, and then talk to MetaBadge in apps.
Yeah, super cool. Another potential crossover here are obviously thinking about Dope Wars and some of their assets going through the fragmentation process that Daniel's done with chain runners. So even if you're not familiar with like the Dope Wars base token, it's a set of attributes that you get. You could even think of like just even mixing and matching those and generating art from sort of the ones you selected and things like that. So other possible crossovers. Super cool. So I had a couple kind of final questions just to wrap this up. Just big picture ideas and maybe, I don't know what you call it, like alpha or, just shining light on projects you're excited about. So first question I had was maybe around the room, and feel free to take a pass if you don't have one in mind, but share with everybody if you have like one underrated project or idea in Web3. Like, doesn't have to be the most underrated, but is there an NFT collection or a protocol or a community that you're part of that you think more people should know about? And anybody can start this off.
I'll jump in there and talk about another gaming project that I'm super hyped on, and it's not only because I am helping out on it. I think it's just an interesting idea. There is a collection that was a free mint kind of over the bear market when everyone was free minting, right? You remember like Goblins came out and that kind of lit everything on fire. A project came out called We Are All Going to Die. And it's kind of like an on-chain Dungeons and Dragons game, and there's a really strong community behind it, building out different experiences for it. So like people have built like this interactive map, and they're burning their tokens for rewards, and they're doing all this really crazy stuff. And I think it would be really interesting to include Tableland in some of the things for that project. So this is not public knowledge, so I'll just drop it here. My community knows, Dope Wars community knows, but I built out a website for them. It's fateofwagdie.com, and you can actually go on there and edit your like character sheet, and you can roll attributes and do things like that, which is pretty fun. And we're currently storing that stuff in a centralized Google Cloud database. But I think at some point it would be really interesting to start moving some of that information into Tableland tables and use the composability of it. So keep an eye out on that. You might see some Tableland stuff making its way into We Are All Going to Die.
I love the art on those too. I remember seeing those and I missed whenever the free mint happened, but just being like, oh, shame, these are awesome. Any others? No other favorites? Dan, you've got a favorite.
I think Nouns deserves a call out. I think what Nouns is doing with the DAO is like super cool, and the way they're really like trying to help anyone that wants to be involved get funded by these prop house votes that they're doing, where you can submit proposals and get funded. And they're also doing some of the like retroactive funding for people that have just contributed but not gone through that process. So Nouns is a really big project, but I also think it's super cool and super amazing.
Off the +1 that, yeah, I think I couldn't agree more. I think the overall engagement and like just the quality of projects coming out of that has been amazing. And then but particularly I think just even like the prop house user experience is really straightforward and simple, and I think it's one of those rare cases where governance is made easy enough that it's accessible. So yeah, I want to +1 to what Data Dan said there.
Yeah, and they're building a Nouns builder so that others can spin up DAOs kind of in the similar formats. So I think that project is going to be done soon. So that's going to be super cool to see what that leads to.
All right. So final question, and this one we can just go around the whole room. Got two parts to this question. One is the big one, which is what's the next thing you're going to build? Is it more on this project? Are you going back to other projects? What do you do? What do you build next week, or what are you starting to build next week, or continue to build next week? And then everybody should have followed your Twitter handles here in the Twitter Spaces already. But and even if you said it in the introduction, just let everybody know again a website or URL, or if you just want to say a Twitter handle where people can follow you and keep up on your projects going forward. But why don't we start where we just ended? If Data Dan, you want to go?
Sure. I have a lot of ideas of things that I want to build in the Chain Runners universe. I think one of the really cool things about chain runners is they have such an amazing ecosystem of like artists that do derivatives. Like you can commission a derivative of your runner and you get to see like really cool different takes and interpretations of those. But there's nothing that links those together. They're currently minted as separate NFT collections, which I think, it's just like a lot of missed opportunity there. Like being able to like bring those all in together and maybe potentially using Tableland to like even set up a thing where I can request the derivative for a commission from an artist and then have that payment and upload of the art and everything being bundled together so that it's all just one identity for the runner. I think that'd be super cool. So I'm looking to build something like that. And I don't have a website or a separate handle for my project, so you can just follow me on Twitter, which is datadan_ETH.
Awesome. How about you, Mike?
I'm going to continue hacking on non-fungible comments, but I'm going to probably next week we're going to be formally announcing and launching Rebel, which is our platform for creators and communities. And so if you run an NFT community, or if you create content, if you want to token gate access to that content or have a place for long form discussions or token gated media, that'll be a great place to check out. You can visit Rebel at rebel.fun. And my personal Twitter handle is @mboyle. So you can follow me there.
Cool. And Faces, you're next on my circle here.
Yeah, thanks. So yeah, check our project out at dopewars, DOPEWARS.GG. A lot of information about the project over there. Next week is crazy for me, but yeah, like I said, we're trying to work out some of the legal stuff and nail that down. So I'm probably actually going to be focusing on that, so we can release these games and make sure that we do it all compliantly. But yeah, definitely going to be continuing to work on the paper, rock, scissors game front end. Probably will actually even release it accessing the testnet, maybe where you don't have to pay any real money, so people can kind of try it out and have fun with it while we hammer out those legal issues. And obviously follow me here at Faces of ETH, and the Twitter handle for our project is the Dope Wars.
Thanks. Yeah, and MetaBadge.
Hey there. Yeah, I mean, definitely looking to get MetaBadge fully out there. We're pretty close, and so I think in the next few weeks it should be at a place where people can start to use it. And so yeah, definitely excited to do that. And yeah, following us at metabadge.com or meta_badge on Twitter.
Cool. And Farah, Zettel.
So we already made our beta online available to follow rig holders. You can try this at zettel.oo, which is ZETTEL.3os. Give a try and tell us what you think. Next week, we're thinking to build probably more. We're going to try to consume our own data and build some DApps on it, extensions to the front end.
Cool. All right, so just a couple last plugs. One, if you're listening and you're a rig owner, Brian, who's on this call, has been running these awesome things called table raisings every week. So we'll have one next week. So if you're interested in how these people were using Tableland, Brian will walk you through how to use the protocol in like 20 minutes. You'll go from, having a wallet to creating a table and making edits to that table and kind of seeing how this thing works. And you don't need to have any kind of technical background or anything. So definitely jump in those if you're interested. They've been going awesome. If you're a developer and you've been listening and this sounds interesting, we'll be running a second round of the pilot program kicking off in about a month now. And so we'll be opening up apps to that shortly. So like I mentioned, just ping us on Discord if you're ready for that already, and we'll make sure we get the application out to you. We'd love to have you involved. But just to say finally, thanks to Brian and Dan for helping move this project forward and working with all the teams. You were awesome this season. And thank you to all the teams for just building some really cool stuff. And it's all been just like so motivating for us on the Tableland side to just like see what you're building and like be there to support you. And hopefully we can keep doing that. So thanks. Bye, everybody.